We are here on the historic American beach for a first ever conversation with these amazing people whose lives and work have truly impacted our community and changed our world. Dr. Cole and Dr. Glover, we want to welcome you here. Thank you so much for joining us. We really do appreciate it. I want to delve right into things. First and foremost, here on American Beach for a very significant reason. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that, Dr. Cole?
Well, first I want to, if I may, say for the two of us, it's a joy to be with you. We respect your work, and we happen to love you. We are on historic American Beach. The history and her story I'll tell as quickly as possible. My great-grandfather, born in 1865, named by his formerly enslaved parents, Abraham Lincoln Lewis, preferred to be called A.L. Lewis. He came from extremely humble beginnings, but he was a man of deep faith, and he worked incredibly hard. He went on to become Florida's first black millionaire. Money that he and others acquired when A.L. Lewis and 6 other black men founded the Afro-American Life Insurance Company in 1901. Let's fast forward to the year 1935, a year in the segregated, racist South, when no black person was welcomed on white folks' beaches. And A.L. Lewis had a vision, and with the support of others, he removed money from the pension bureau of the Afro-American Life Insurance Company. A building still remains on Union Street in Jacksonville. And with those funds, he purchased this incredible amount of land on God's green earth, right on the Atlantic Ocean. And these were his words. Why was he founding American Beach? Said A.L. Lewis, because black people deserve recreation and rest without humiliation. It is a community now where the majority of the homes are in the possession of folk who look like you and me. But it is a community that has also welcomed people of other races, of other religions. How do I know? Maybe of other sexual orientations. A.L. Lewis, I think, from his special place up in glory, would feel pretty good about American Beach.
I'd say so. There's no question about that. Dr. Glover, when you came here earlier this afternoon, there's something you did, not inside, but outside. Tell us about that walk you had and why you decided to do that here on American Beach.
Well, actually, when I was a young person coming up, when they talked about Fernandina Beach, they talked about that was the black beach. And I think there was a certain level of pride that we all felt that would be a beach that we refer to as the black beach. Now, unfortunately, I did not get an opportunity to come to Fernandina Beach. First thing, my parents was somewhat always apprehensive about the water, didn't want us to drown, so to speak. And when we did go to the beach, we would stop at Little Talbot Island and not come all the way down to Fernandina. But, you know, when I look at the history And Dr. Cole talked about the history so eloquently. I went to A.L. Lewis School when I was a kid. And little did I know that I would be sitting in the presence of and having a conversation with part of the family lineage. And that is, to me, awesome.
If I may,
Please do.
I have the honor of sitting, yes, as the great-granddaughter of A.L. Lewis, but with a former president of Edward Waters College, now university, on whose board A.L. Lewis sat.
Oh, my goodness.
And A.L. Lewis had a very close and special friendship with the good Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune. She convinced him to serve on the board of Bethune-Cookman. He convinced her to serve on the board of Everett Waters.
Oh, my goodness.
But just to put a pin in this, a special pin, Mary Frances Lewis Betsch, my mother, served as a professor of English and the registrar of the very now university where you were the brother president. So the ties are so close.
Oh my goodness.
So
That's
close.
awesome. That's awesome. I will be repeating that in subsequent conversations, like I was so aware of the history of Edward Waters College, now university.
You're going to hold on to that little nugget,
Yes,
I'm
yes,
sure,
absolutely,
for many, many years to come. Sitting here with you two, I'm just in awe. I think everyone who is able to experience this recording will be in awe as well. When asked to talk with you two, I thought to myself, what do people want to hear from Dr. Cole as well as from Dr. Glover? And I said, knowledge. You two have a wealth of knowledge. So before we even get started, I want to talk about education. You guys are. When you think about educating our African-American children, we think of you. What is the significance of education? If you can, I'm going to start with you, Dr. Glover.
Well, first thing, when I look at education and I look at my career, my entire professional career, I spent more than 37 years in law enforcement. And in that process, I've, of course, were committed, dedicated, and sworn to keep this community safe. And in that process, I certainly had to arrest young people. It was always with a heavy heart, because what a number of people may be surprised to find out, that I was arrested when I was a young man. I was arrested, I was working at Morrison Cafeteria. I left work one night and I had 2 of Morrison Cafeteria's napkins in my pocket that I had been using as a handkerchief. And I was stopped by 2 police officers. They searched me and they arrested me for petty larceny, put me in jail for those napkins. And here I sat in a jail cell because of those 2 napkins. Now, some people are saying that it was no way those police officers would have arrested a white kid with 2 napkins. But I did have the napkins in my pocket, and the napkins did belong to Morrison Cafeteria. But I will say my supervisor from Morrison Cafeteria went to court with me, and he actually told the judge the overall situation, and the judge discharged the case. But the irony of it is that I made 37 years in law enforcement, arresting young people too, and then get the call to come to Edward Waters College as president. It had to be a divine calling, because I went from putting them in jail to educating them, signing off on their degree. And to me, I always thought that was the epitome of redemption, because it relieved me from some of the guilt. And one of the things I knew as a law enforcement officer, that I didn't arrest many people with college degrees. People who were educated, professional people, those were not the people I was arresting. But those who didn't have the education, the dropouts, those were the ones. So when I say I went back as a college president and was able to do that for 8 years, it had to be a calling from heaven. And I will always appreciate that.
Dr. Cole, I'm going to ask you the same question with a bit of a twist, of course, right? Education. This conference is all about healing, racial healing, reconciliation. Let's talk about how education is a part of the key to that. Would you agree, first of all, and explain why?
Yes, I agree. And I know the Brother President would agree that it's one of the things that education can help one to do. One of the individuals in the entire world that I have great admiration for, well, actually, he's up in glory, is President Nelson Mandela. He once said, education is the most powerful means that you will have to help to change the world. I believe that. I think education actually has two functions. First, you should better understand yourself. You should better understand your people. You sure need to learn about other people and their history and their culture. That's the first function. But secondly, as the Brother President Nelson Mandela said, you are to learn what is your role in helping to change the world. That is why I am deeply concerned now that so much of what I think our young people need to know is being challenged. Our young people need to understand the history and her story of our country and our world. And some of that is not a pretty picture. But when I was growing up in Jacksonville, Florida, folk told me, girl, you can't know where you're going if you don't know where you've been. And so to become an instrument of positive change, you gotta know who you are, who your people are, who the world's people are, what has happened and why.
You know, a big part of who you are, Dr. Glover, came about with a really tragic event. I'm speaking of Axe Handle Saturday. We've seen, some of us have only seen the images, and it brings you to tears to even think about what some went through, what you went through. Can you take us back to that day and how it shaped your life?
Yes, Keitha, you accurately portrayed it when you say shaped my life. I was, of course, as I stated earlier, working at Morrison Cafeteria, and there had been some sit-ins occur in the downtown area by a group of NAACP youth group members. And we had a number of white, I would say, Klans persons and Ku Klux Klans persons and white races come in downtown Jacksonville to confront those demonstrators who were actually conducting sit-ins at one of the eating establishments downtown. It was either Woolworth or Grant, Woolworth. And they chased those demonstrators out of town, hitting them with axe handles. While I was working, I did not know that that was going on outside. And our boss had come in early and told us, everybody in the cafeteria, to leave. Stop what you're doing and leave downtown now. And everybody left. But my last duty before I left, I was supposed to mop the area that we all worked in. And he, of course, made it clear he wanted us to leave right then, but I could not leave that duty undone. So I left maybe 35, 40 minutes later after everybody was gone. And when I walked out, I was confronted by a mob. And they quickly surrounded me with those axe handles. And they were actually hitting me with the axe handles, calling me names. You know the name they called me and all of that. But they were not hitting me so hard that they were disabling me. And I saw a police officer standing just outside of the circle in which they had me in. And I saw a break and I ran to the police officer, and I'll never forget what he said. The name, the words ring in my head today. He said, "You better get out of here before they kill you." And I ran. And I can remember running, almost afraid to look back to see how close they were. And I ran. And I was so afraid. Terrified does not explain it strong enough. And I can remember going home, and I can remember laying across my bed, crying. And I was not crying because I was hurt. I was crying because I ran. And I was scared. And you see, in my neighborhood at that time, you didn't run away from a fight. If you got in a fight and you lost the fight, you lost it with honor. But if you ran, you were considered a coward. And no one wanted to live with being a coward. I felt like a coward. And I was so embarrassed and so hurt. But I made a vow then, I will never not do something that I should do because of fear. And that shaped my life, gave me the courage to run for sheriff when people told me over and over that those white people would never put a black person in that police department as sheriff. And I had to run. I couldn't walk away, because if I walked away, I would have to live with the fact that I walked away because I was afraid. Well, I ran, and those white people voted for me. And I became the first African-American sheriff elected, not only in Jacksonville, but the state of Florida since the 1880s. It was because I couldn't walk away. And some of the stories I tell about running in a house engulfed in flames and pulling out a person and having to be rushed to the hospital, overcome by smoke, and climbing up on bridges and talking people down, talking a man down as a hostage negotiator. Those are the things that I couldn't walk away from. And if I had walked away from them, it would have been something that I felt like I might have had to say. I didn't do it because I was afraid. So it shaped my life. And I will go so far as to say it put me in this chair today.
I want to talk about a book you recently published, Racism in American Life, A Call to Action. You mentioned the time that we're living in right now. Let's speak about the importance of your book right now.
It's a small book. It's a book actually of 3 lectures that I gave at Mercer College. But I would like to think that the size does not tell the whole story, because it's a book that attempts to help those in the American Academy, colleges and universities, whether it's Edward Waters or Spelman or Harvard or Yale. But it attempts in particular to help individuals in colleges and universities to stop running away from understanding racism. And by extension, all systems of inequality, sexism, heterosexism, yes, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, ageism. It's a book that basically says that we as a race, the human race, have as one of our most fundamental responsibilities to learn to live peacefully with those who do not look like us, who do not pray as we do not love as we do, are not able to move or hear or see as we do. That's our major responsibility, to do that. And so the book really calls upon colleges and universities, but by extension, the corporate world, the not-for-profit world, yes, the world that my brother president, my brother sheriff knows so well, the world of law enforcement officers. It calls on all of us to do a far better job of figuring out how in the world are we going to live with each other. As someone who's 85 years of age, I didn't imagine this is where my country and my world would be at this time in history. a period when there is more divisiveness, more lines separating people by race and gender and other means by which we are formed and lived. And so it's not just in my country, it's around the world now that leaders are being elected, that parties are coming into power who have as a fundamental set of lenses through which they see the world white supremacy. It is so dangerous. It is so frightening. I know that books cannot wipe it away. But I do know, to come back to our earlier point, there is power in knowledge. There is hope through understanding. And so I will just keep writing and talking and teaching and most fundamentally learning so that I can remain as a social justice activist. You see, that's what I believe is the most important role that I can play and that anyone else can play.
You hit on a lot of key points there, but to me, we're going to focus right now on what each of us can do, like you said, as individuals, because this conference is all about healing. Dr. Hodo put this together so we could have these uncomfortable conversations you mentioned. Is that the key? Is that where we start, by at least speaking about what we're seeing, feeling? Where do we start? How do we start the healing process?
Well, of course, the doctor has certainly framed the challenge that we have quite appropriately. But being forthright, you know, there are some who say that we have not made any progress, and we are slowly making progress. I think we have made significant progress here in Jacksonville. And I think it's fitting and proper that we acknowledge some of that. When you talk about mayors, sheriffs, and some of the high positions, a number of them have been owned by or operated by African Americans. They, you know, starting from school superintendent, vice president, president, city council, and the authorities in Jacksonville. Most all of them have been led by African Americans. So we are doing well, but sometimes as an African American, you feel like they keep moving the goalposts, you know, and we are getting some pushback, but we have the opportunity to continue to do what we are doing. We want open dialogue. You know, we are a community. When we talk about community, we talk about people who are doing things together. And we live in a country of democracy. But then when you see what happened in the Capitol, you see us making some steps back. But we're going to get past this. And when we get past this, as we have had other challenges in this country, we are going to be better going forward. And I am excited about that. What we have, to be honest with you, is divisiveness in government now. I have never felt like the atmosphere as it relates to partisan politics. I've never felt like it was so toxic now. And I'm convinced that we have set aside what the citizens want and just in a situation where we're fighting, parties are fighting. And it's all about party. If one party says yes, the other will say no, no matter what the results will be and the impact it will have on the citizen. We got to get through that. We got to get through that and come together again, because as an American citizen, if we come together, combined with the talent that we have in this country, we could raise to the height of the country in this world that's more envied by any other country in this world. But we somehow, I see that in jeopardy now.
I'm sure a lot of people will agree with you on that one. We have elections coming up in November, right around the corner. I'd like you to speak to our viewers, whoever's watching this, about the importance of elections, the importance of getting out there and voting come November. Please, Dr. Cole.
Well, I will risk using a phrase that is perhaps overused in the view of some. We've got to vote like our lives depend on it, because they do. I believe this so strongly that I have been as engaged as I could possibly be with as many folk as I can possibly be engaged with in pushing back against voter suppression. And so I know I've taken a wee bit of a detour from the question of voting to say, first of all, in my country, a democratic country, how dare there be efforts to keep some people from voting? The evidence is overwhelming that that is happening. And I'm going to become very personal now and say that months ago, when I was still in the position of serving as the president of the National Council of Negro Women, we as the National Council of Negro Women took leadership in bringing women of all hues and persuasions and cultures together to talk about voter suppression. We marched to the Senate building, the Hart building, and a group of us stood in front of those doors. And when the Capitol policeman, it was a man, at least he presented as a man, when he said, if you do not move, and this is the third time you've been told to move, you will be arrested. And at 85 years of age, yes, those cuffs were put on my hands, and I was put into that wagon and taken to the Capitol police station. That's how strongly I feel that no one has the right to create any devices that dare to stop anyone from voting. Now, as we come to these midterm elections, there is so much at stake. And if we can find a way, in particular, to urge young people to see that everything that happens in their lives is at stake in voting. I mean, who is going to protect them? Where will they be able to go to school? What kind of housing? Will there be jobs? This is what voting is about. It's about the things that are our rights and who we think can best deliver and protect those rights. And so, again, we've got to vote, I think, in particular, as people from marginalized communities, African Americans, other people of color, people who live in communities that are marginalized because they don't have resources. Poor people, the LGBTQ community, anyone who is in a marginalized position has an extra responsibility to vote.
Dr. Glover, I'm seeing you shaking your head at everything Dr. Cole is saying. Yes, yes, yes.
Well, I cannot say it any better than that. And when you got concerted efforts to limit access to the ballot box, that only means that is where the threat is coming from. In a democracy, it's a voting process and the majority rules. And when that happens, and if you don't like who's being elected, then you have to come in and remediate that process by limiting access to the ballot box. And that's what's happening now. But as Dr. Cole so convincingly put it, we have to stay the course on this. We got to continue to do what we are doing. And when you take the voting process and tell a person, if you're standing in line, no one can give you
A drink of water?
A drink of water, no matter how hot it is and what your physical condition is. We're going to penalize you. How did we get here? And we got to put the right people in office to make certain that we correct those kinds of inequities.
The theme for the conference, I'm sure you're well aware, is the blueprint for a beloved community. What action do you feel we need to take right now to get there, to find that blueprint for a beloved community? And what does that look like to either of you anyway? Tell us about that. What does it look like to have a beloved community?
I often think about, in terms of those days back then, even though I tease Dr. Glover that he's so young. I mean, he's, I'm his elder. But back in those days in the 60s, when we were sitting in and marching, and yes, going to jail, we talked so much about what was wrong and what we had to get rid of. I wish we had spent even more time joining our dearest brother, Dr. Martin Luther King, in talking about what we wanted the world to be like. Spending more time imagining, dreaming of, painting pictures of, writing poetry about the beloved community. And so these days when there is so much strife, so much dissension, the rise of white supremacy in a way that is truly frightening, I keep reminding myself of the responsibility to think about that beloved community. What is it like when, yes, always using nonviolent means, never assuming that we will right wrongs through violence. But what will it be like when one day, and I know I will not be here to see it, but what will it be like one day when, as Dr. King said, so simply but powerfully, when no one will judge another by the color of that person's skin? What will it be like when women can feel the safety that they deserve because they are women? What will it be like when they have autonomy of their own bodies? What will it be like when no child will go to school based on zip code and therefore not receive a good education? Can we imagine a time when not one American child will go to bed hungry? Because poverty has no place in the beloved community. So, how do we get there? We get there through struggle. Dr. King was once asked, how do we get there? The question may not have been exactly that, but fundamentally that was the question. And what he was saying was, there are three ways. You got to educate, you got to legislate, and when necessary, you've got to agitate. That, I think, is how we reach the beloved community. Through education, through legislation, and always non-violently through agitation.
Dr. Glover, I'm going to ask you that same question, but before you even get to that, I have to ask you, as someone, we think of Jacksonville, we think of you. What are you seeing right now in our community that you feel desperately needs to change immediately, right now, in Jacksonville in particular?
The people who actually understand the problem, and the people who actually have some solutions. I am too often seeing them not speak up. They are silent. And I'm not sure what's going on. I suspect it's party. And when I say party, I'm talking Democrat, Republican. And I just think that it's going to take people who have the courage to say, this is wrong. And the type people that say, this is wrong, will be hopefully the type people that other people will listen to and will pause on some things that they've been ignoring. That's where we are in our history now. We're going to have to step up. I think about Abraham Lincoln, when I'm sure he sat around the table with his cabinet and said, you know, I think I'll free the slaves. I'm sure his cabinet thought that there's no way you can do that. You can't do that. Are you losing your mind? But he had a vision, and he had the courage to do that. Dr. King, he talked about peace. nonviolence. There were those who wanted to have an armed revolution. But he had the courage to stand up. And we were able to accomplish that. Now we are all proud of it. We still have people like that today. But for some reason, there's been a transition into this silence. And we just gonna have people who stand up and say, this is wrong. I mean, you talk about suppressing voters' rights. We've been talking for 50 years about encouraging people to go to vote. So how did we get here? We just got quite a bit to fix. And you know, I do think it transcends racial lines. Because when I looked at the demonstrations during the George Floyd incident, there were days I thought I saw more white folk than black folk.
You did. Right is right, wrong is wrong. People understand that.
That's right. That's what, and we got to get back to that. And I don't know how we lost ground from that to where we are now. But we got to figure it out. It goes back to, as Dr. Cole indicated, education, and it goes back to what I'm sitting here emphasizing, and that's courage.
Why do you think people fear diversity so much? What is that? Why?
Well, if I may draw on the field that I'm trained in, we know as anthropologists that there really is not a gene that creates racism or sexism or some other form of discrimination. This behavior is learned. And unfortunately, it is learned very early. You don't want to play with them. Those are the people, you know, you don't want to be around them. Just the dropping of language. Well, did you go in that store and did you get a good deal? Did you Jew them down? What do you mean, Jew them down? Oh, you don't want to do that. That little boy, no, 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 no. You'll be a sissy if you act like that. Early in our lives, we are taught not to trust and certainly not to believe in those who are different from us. And so, while it is taught, I believe it is humanly possible to unteach it. Oh, but it is a mighty difficult process, especially because connected with the isms is privilege. And so if you are white and you get all of these privileges, who's gonna wanna give them up? If you are male and there are privileges that come from being of that gender, why would you want to give them up? I think Dr. King had the answer. Because there's something more precious, more beautiful, more fulfilling, more powerful than privilege. That is why I come back to the beloved community because it says no matter how much privilege and power you have, come here. Come experience something that is so sweet, that is so precious, and that is the ability to see your own humanity through the humanity of others.
We could stay here for hours and hours and talk and talk and talk, but I'm going to respect both of your time. And I want to ask you this. We're not closing yet. Don't think you're running away yet. What do you want people to get from this conference overall? When they watch this, experience this, what do you want people to take away?
Well, I want people to take away that we are stronger together. When we talk about it as a community, you know, I think that when you look at a diverse group, you're going to have different talents, different strong points, and different weak points, and that kind of thing. But when you have your weak points, you will have people coming together who will strengthen you in those areas. Dr. Cole articulated it so well when she said this whole notion of white privilege seemed to be in jeopardy with a lot of the white race. And I don't see it being in jeopardy at all, particularly when you look at the wealth in this country, 90% of it is owned by whites. When you look at the businesses and corporations in this country, that's probably the same percentage owned by white. And when you look at the governors in this country, we're talking about representatives, we're talking about senators, we're talking about presidents, all the way up through the legislatures in this country, you know, 85% going to be white. So I don't see a threat on that. But what we need to be doing, we need to be coming together so that we can work together. And I would like a day to come when African Americans make progress, then you will see the white community cheer. You see, we are living in an era today where all of this wealth has come through ancestral wealth. It's been passed down. And a lot of that wealth was accumulated on the backs of free labor from slavery. And yet we still have too many poor kids running around in this country who do not have access to higher education because of their inability to go to college. Can you imagine how many potential geniuses, how many potential doctors and lawyers that we have out there who, if they got an education, could contribute to our culture, our community, can solve some of the problems that we got if we made it accessible to the people. But when we look in the criminal justice system, African Americans are disproportionately represented there, locked up. So we got to figure out a way to reverse that. Look, we put a man on the moon. I mean, this country can do anything it sets its mind to do. And if we decided that we wanted to truly solve the problems of divisiveness, racism, and sexism in this country, we could do it. We could do it without a doubt in my mind. But we got to have the courageous population to stand up And that's where we are lacking. That's exactly right.
Dr. Glover, how old are you?
I am 79 years old.
You're the younging amongst you
He's
two.
a youngin'.
The youngin'.
This is my young brother.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is my young brother.
I think she's the only one that referred to me as a young'un, but I'll take it.
Well, she can, because in just 2 weeks, Dr. Cole will be
86.
Oh my
86
goodness, yes.
years
Well,
old.
I can tell you, the eloquence is so apparent.
It certainly is.
But speaking of age, I do need to say this, that I believe that our struggle to even taste a little bit of the idea of the beloved community will be enhanced when we learn to engage in nonviolent action intergenerationally. I'm on a bit of a campaign about this. And it may sound a little ironic that someone who's 86 years old is calling for intergenerationality. But the division that I see too often between elders and young'uns is not advancing peace and justice. And so I think that there are things that each of us can do. For example, don't go to a whole lot of meetings without making sure that you're taking a younger person with you. Do what my brother and I do. Have more mentees than you can imagine. But keep knowing that a good mentoring relationship is never one way. And so learn from being with young people. After all, they are the only future that we have.
You interviewed Dr. Maya Angelou the day after she turned 86. And you asked her one of the major things she's learned over the years. I don't know if you remember her response, but it was one simple word. She said, patience. And you said at that time, whoa, that's hard for me. Where I am, I'm losing patience. Where are you now 2 weeks away from where she was then, 86?
What a terrific question. I was profoundly blessed to know Dr. Maya Angelou. She called me with that deep voice of hers, sister. And I called her Dr. Maya. And I've been thinking about her throughout this conversation because each time that my brother, Dr. Glover, has spoken about going against fear and courage, I've thought of her because she once said, courage is the most important of all of the virtues. Without it, nothing else can matter. But let me try to answer your question directly. Dr. Maya looked at me and said, patience. And I couldn't imagine at that point the power of patience. Now I do. But I'd love to edit my reaction back in the day and say, what an extraordinary combination there is when patience is in cahoots with persistence. If we are just waiting, some good will probably happen. But if we are persistent in this struggle for, yes, diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion, World's got to get better.
It has to. We have nowhere to go but up, right? Or so we would like to hope. Dr. Glover, when I think of you, you entered the police force in Jacksonville in 66, the 60s. I'm thinking to myself, why would a African-American man want to enter the police force at a time like that? What was going through his mind, his heart? I have you here right with me now. I want to know why.
That's an excellent question. When I was a younger man, I was enamored with police stories. And I used to, even before television, I used to listen to police stories on the radio. And the whole notion of becoming a detective, I was obsessed with. And when I graduated from college, all of my peers went off to get their teaching jobs and that kind of thing. I wanted to go and get a job as a police officer because I knew I had to be a police officer before I became a detective. And also knew I had an arrest record, which was gonna make it an uphill battle. But people told me over and over that it's no sense in you putting in to become a police officer because they're not going to allow you to be a police officer and you've been in jail. Well, I want you to know that I went ahead and put in the application anyway. And for a while, just like they say, nothing happened. I didn't even get a call. And then I got a call from my brother, said, I need you to talk to this officer, who was another black officer, and he met with me and I told him my story. And he said, 2 napkins? Which he thought was so absurd. And I said, yes. And he said, oh my goodness, this is hard to believe. I think I'm gonna take you up to see the mayor, who was white mayor, of course. And I said, okay, with a real cynical feeling, because I didn't think anything was gonna happen. And he said, I know the mayor, and I know how many black folk were walking around saying they knew the mayor, and I thought that was an exaggerated statement. And see, and I talk about this because I want other people to hear about it, because when you have a vision, you don't know where the help is going to come from. You got to be persistent. And when he said, I know the mayor, I think in my mind, I said, yeah, right. I said, okay, well, when are we supposed to go see the mayor? In a less enthusiastic way. And he said, let's go right now. Then I thought in my mind, I know he don't know the mayor now, because you just don't walk in the mayor's office. And I tell this story. And we did. We went to City Hall, went up to the mayor's office, and I'm just going like I'm just checking the box and get this over with, because my brother put us together. When he walked in that office, the mayor's secretary jumped up from her desk and said, hey, Marvin, how's the children? I said, oh my God, we on to something. And he took me in the mayor's office. The mayor listened to my situation, went down to the Civil Service Board, told them, I want you to hire Nathaniel Glover. And the Civil service person told the mayor, yeah, we saw his application and we know he got a college degree, but he been in jail. And we don't hire people who've been in jail. And oh, by the way, Mr. Mayor, I don't work for you. I work for the Civil Service Board. And the mayor told her, yes, and incidentally, I'll be talking to two of them about replacing them. I want Nathaniel Glover to take the test to become a police officer. And Nathaniel Glover got an opportunity based on the threat from the mayor, Lou Ritter, to the civil service director, and end up being a historical sheriff in this county and an inducted member of the Law Enforcement Hall of Fame in the state of Florida. Isn't that simple?
I love it. For those of you watching right now, I'm going to give you a little bit of things, what's going on behind the scenes, a little look right now. Dr. Hodo is actually in the room. She's over there. Shocker, she's being quiet. I know. That's not how she normally rolls. Are we okay over here, Dr. Hodo? You have everything you need?
Yes.
Okay. You know, it's rare that we actually have you guys here together. Never happened before, as a matter of fact. This is just awesome. I'm really enjoying everything. Anything that you guys are up to right now, we are all curious to know, what are you working on at this point? I know you're still staying very busy, very active. You can't help it.
Well, ladies first.
What am I doing now? I think in many ways I'm doing what I've always done, which is to try to be as effective a social activist as I can, writing, loving art and being in the museum world, and still doing some consulting because I do that kind of work in the diversity space. But I also want to say that one of the most rewarding things that I'm doing right now, because I believe in service, because I was taught my responsibility to be of service to others, is that I'm serving on the board of the local museum in my community. It's right up the road a piece. You could walk there easily from here. And it was named the American Beach Museum. And my sister, the beach lady, as she's known in this area and certainly in Jacksonville as well, my sister was a part of that group of folk who founded that community. And so the board very recently voted to change the name from the American Beach Community to the A.L. Lewis Museum on American Beach. And our extraordinarily gifted executive director, who's a dear friend of Brother Sheriff's, Carol J. Alexander, will take the leadership role as we reopen the museum on October 14th and 15th. And let me just say this. Museums are a part of our struggle. And here's why. Because when museums only tell the stories of some of us, and historically that is what they've done, straight, often rich, white men, that's whose portraits we see, and that's whose artistry we were to adore. But museums have the power to tell all of our stories. And the A.L. Lewis Museum is a museum that will tell the story, certainly of the trials and tribulations of this community and of all black people, but it'll also tell the stories of our triumphs. So, as the young'uns would say, what's up? What you doing?
And you are the youngin in here, so what's up?
Well, I need to dwell in this environment if you all consider me a young'un. So let me just say that currently in my life, I am considering and advocating legacy now. I want to leave something that after I've left this earth, people will benefit from it. And at some point during that process of being a beneficiary, somebody might call the name Nat Glover. So, doing two things. One, I am teaching leadership. And this whole notion of how to effectively lead people is an art that I can tell you there are a number of people in leadership positions who actually have no idea how to lead people. And we all know and seen people in significant leadership positions, and we say to ourselves, if we don't say it to them, how in the heck did you get here? And the reason for a lot of that has to do with we don't get any training on how to do that. We don't go out and play football without practice. We don't do anything that's highly technical. Even medicine, you have to go to medical school. But sometimes we get promoted to a leadership position and we over hundreds of people. And we don't know anything about leading people. Doing a job and leading people doing the job. It's two different skill sets. I teach the skill set of leadership. But in addition to that, and I think it's no less important, I am in the process of writing my memoirs. And the reason I wanted so awfully badly to write my memoirs is because of how my life has been. And it's just an example that I want to share. And, you know, Dr. Cole talked about persistence. I talk about perseverance. And you can do anything. And I think that when you have a vision, if you stick to it, if you try to realize it, I'm convinced that the Lord will send you the resources to make it happen. But you have to show the faith to make certain that there's no doubt about your mission. And incidentally, I think I've had the kind of life that some of which we've discussed here today, and I want to take the proceeds of the book and provide college scholarships for people who qualify in the needy environment. And I tell you, one of the first things I did when I retired from the sheriff's office, I took 4 years of my pension. For 4 years, I didn't receive any pension. I took that money, put it in a college scholarship fund, and was able to pay for college education for 39 young people. And I want to do more of that. I want to leave that legacy. I want to leave that trail. I want that young man that's out there selling drugs, knowing if he finished high school, he will have an opportunity to go to college. And that's what this is all about. So I hope around the first of the year that I'm able to have a book signing process, and we can have a program that we will launch that book.
What's the last thing you'd like people to know before we leave here today? Anything you want to add or mention you feel people need to know?
I think one of the most important lessons that anyone is really charged to learn is captured in these words. Words that Muhammad Ali spoke, a version of this. One of my sheroes, Marion Wright Edelman, who was the chair of the board at Spelman College when I was so privileged to go there, she uses these words. I was taught this by A.L. Lewis and all of those folk who grew me up in Jacksonville, Florida. And the words are these: doing for others is just the rent you gotta pay for your room on earth. And so as I listen to my brother president, my brother sheriff, I hear that. I hear that commitment to being of service to others. No matter how little you got something you can give. And I really believe the good Lord, she demands of each of us that we give it.
Dr. Glover, I'm asking you the same question. Anything you want to add or mention or you feel people need to know before we wrap things up?
Just know that, when if the Lord blessed you by putting you on this earth, you have some assets. And not but two things on this earth is certain, and that is death and change. Things will change, and you are certain at some point to leave this earth. So make a difference. Give people a reason to call your name after you have left this earth. Now, I'm just going to tell you, between the time you pass and the time of your funeral, everybody's going to be sorry. Everybody's going to be mourning. But after you've gone for a year, if there's no reason for a person to call your name, then you didn't make the footprint that you could have made. But when the Lord made you, there's no blueprint, no one else like you. You got some talents, and some of them are at gift level. Make a difference.
Dr. Glover, Dr. Cole, we are so thrilled that you took the time to do this today. This conversation meant the world to me. It's going to mean the world to so many others who are able to view this and experience it. And folks, if you have any questions for these two powerhouses, what you can do is add it in the chat, and we'll try to get as many of them answered as possible. Thanks again for joining us.